This is the story of a land overwhelmed not only by water and collapsing mountainsides, but also by fear, resilience, and the fragile hope that rises in the aftermath. It takes place in Maninjau, West Sumatra, Indonesia, on December 6, 2025, a date that will remain etched in the memories of thousands. On this day, the region had already been battered by weeks of unstable weather, but nothing suggested that the afternoon would turn into one of the most disastrous episodes in recent Indonesian history. Heavy rain clouds gathered over the volcanic ridges surrounding the lake, and as the hours passed, the skies darkened into a deep, threatening gray. The first drops fell gently, almost innocently, but in reality the soil and riverbeds were already saturated. Days of previous rainfall, combined with steep topography and deforestation in upstream areas, had created the perfect conditions for a major hydrological disaster. By late afternoon, torrential rain hammered the hills and valleys with violent intensity. The streams leading down from the mountains swelled in minutes. In some villages, residents reported that small creeks transformed into roaring brown rivers in less than an hour. Water levels rose faster than people could react. In low-lying neighborhoods, muddy currents pushed through windows, carrying debris, branches, and household items. Villagers tried desperately to move furniture or block doors, but the power of the water overwhelmed every effort. Along the steep roads connecting the highlands to the lake, particularly the winding sections of Kalot 44, saturated soil began to slip. Entire slopes crumbled. Landslides erupted almost simultaneously across different points of the region. Residents described hearing a deep rumbling sound, like thunder coming from beneath the earth. Then the ground moved, trees toppled, rocks tumbled, and torrents of mud surged downward. Roads vanished beneath thick layers of earth. Electrical poles were uprooted. Vehicles were trapped, crushed, or pushed off the road. In villages such as Belaibelo, Sungayasem, Warapisan, Kububar, and Simpang Pusmas Maninjau, communities were suddenly isolated. Water poured into homes with alarming speed. Families climbed onto tables, onto roofs, or onto whatever higher ground they could reach. Entire households evacuated in darkness as the rain continued to fall relentlessly. Children cried in fear. The elderly struggled to move quickly. Some residents had no time to save anything but themselves. Meanwhile, in Palambayan and other areas near the river crossings, wooden and temporary bridges, some recently repaired after the previous week's flooding, were swept away again. The force of the river tore through their foundations, carrying beams and planks downstream like matchsticks. Access to several communities was immediately severed. Local authorities, rescue teams, and volunteers tried to respond, but the combination of flooding, landslides, destroyed bridges and blocked roads made it nearly impossible to reach the most affected areas. Heavy machinery could not pass through mud-covered roads. Ambulances couldn't approach trapped villages. Many rescue workers had to continue on foot, climbing over fallen trees, wading through chest-deep water, and navigating through hazardous terrain. Across West Sumatra, the situation was mirrored in dozens of other districts. In the days prior, the entire island of Sumatra had suffered a catastrophic chain of disasters: flash floods, river overflows, landslides, collapsed infrastructure, and widespread displacement. By early December 2025, the death toll across the island had surpassed 900, with hundreds still missing and more than 1 million people forced from their homes. Emergency shelters overflowed, and many evacuees lacked clean water, medicine, or access to communication. Hospitals worked beyond capacity, facing shortages of supplies while trying to treat trauma injuries, infections, respiratory issues, and shock. Reports emerged highlighting the environmental vulnerabilities that amplified the destruction: deforestation in upland areas, illegal logging, land clearing for plantations, and weakened riverbanks. Without the stabilizing roots of forests, slopes were more prone to collapse. Without vegetation to absorb runoff, rivers surged more violently. The disaster was not only the result of natural forces but also years of human pressure on fragile ecosystems. But beyond the confirmed facts of the disaster lies the deeper story, the story of what people lived through, what they witnessed, and how they endured. Night fell faster than usual that day. Heavy clouds swallowed the last traces of daylight, plunging the region into a kind of artificial night. Rain continued to pound rooftops, turning every street into a flowing river of mud. The sound of water was deafening, echoing through the valleys. People struggled to hear each other's shouts. In many homes, electricity failed just as water seeped into living rooms. Parents carried their children to the upper floors in darkness, guided only by the dim glow of mobile phones. Some families gathered in groups, linking arms so no one would be swept away. The cold rain soaked everything: clothes, blankets, mattresses, prayer rugs, wooden floors. Villagers could hear the snapping of bamboo, the grinding of rocks, the collapse of walls. Houses built too close to the riverbanks were ripped open by the force of the current. Vegetation drifted through villages, mixed with household debris: chairs, toys, gas tanks, even portions of rooftops torn off by the wild torrent. Meanwhile, high on the slopes overlooking the lake, landslides created barriers of mud and stone that cut off entire communities. Some residents walked for hours through steep, slippery paths, carrying children on their shoulders, helping the elderly, balancing bags of clothes on their heads. They reached aid posts exhausted, covered in mud, trembling from cold and shock. Rescuers described scenes of immense distress, families searching for missing relatives, neighbors calling out names in the darkness, dogs barking desperately, children trying to understand why their home had suddenly disappeared. Emergency shelters were improvised in mosques, schools, and community halls. Wet clothes were hung on ropes, everyone huddled together around makeshift lanterns. Volunteers distributed rice, biscuits, and bottled water, but supplies were limited. In some shelters, the anguished cries of those who had lost family members filled the air. Every hour brought new information: bodies found downstream, names added to the missing list, roads still impassable, rivers rising again. Grief mixed with fear. Some people refused to sleep, afraid that another landslide or flood would strike during the night. Yet amid the devastation, extraordinary acts of courage unfolded. Young men tied ropes around their waists and plunged into fast-moving water to rescue trapped neighbors. Women formed human chains to help people cross muddy terrain. Farmers brought their own tools: shovels, machetes to clear blocked paths. Teachers guided groups of children to safety, comforting them along the way. Local fishermen used small boats to reach isolated houses, sometimes navigating through debris-filled water to save the stranded. When the rain finally began to subside after hours of relentless downpour, the scope of the destruction slowly emerged. Entire sections of villages were buried under mud. Dozens of roads were gouged open or washed away. Bridges lay twisted and broken along the riverbanks. Cars were overturned, stacked like toys. Palm trees stood uprooted, fields were ruined. Livestock wandered endlessly, confused and injured. But even as the physical world collapsed, the emotional weight of the disaster was perhaps even heavier. Survivors spoke of the moment they realized their homes were gone. They talked about the silence after the storm, a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by distant sobs, the dripping of water from broken rooftops, and the rustling of debris as rescuers dug with their hands. In the days that followed, communities began the slow process of reckoning with what had happened. Bulldozers arrived to clear roads, but progress was slow. Relief trucks struggled through half-cleared paths. Helicopters dropped supplies to communities still cut off. Doctors set up temporary clinics to treat wounds, infections, and respiratory problems caused by prolonged exposure to cold, mud, and contaminated water. Children tried to resume some sense of normalcy, playing with makeshift toys in muddy fields, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the tragedy surrounding them. Elders gathered to recount past disasters, comparing memories and offering advice for how to rebuild. Religious leaders held prayers over the ruins, calling for strength, unity, and protection. Families searched tirelessly through debris, hoping to find objects, photos, clothes, pieces of furniture that held sentimental value. Sometimes they found nothing but broken fragments, swallowed by the mud. Months of reconstruction now lay ahead. Engineers would have to assess which slopes remained unstable, which roads could be rebuilt, which rivers needed reinforcement. Environmental experts warned that without immediate reforestation and stronger land management policies, similar disasters would continue to strike. Local governments discussed plans to relocate homes away from hazardous zones, although many residents were reluctant to leave the land their families had inhabited for generations. And yet, despite the overwhelming destruction, something persisted: an unyielding spirit. The people of West Sumatra have endured disasters before: earthquakes, tsunamis, eruptions, floods. Each time, they rebuild, Each time, they buried their losses deep within their hearts, turning grief into resilience. This disaster, as monstrous as it was, revealed once again the strength of their community bonds. In Maninjau, as the water receded slowly from the lake's edge and the mountain slopes remained scarred by dark, raw gashes, the survivors looked toward the horizon. The air was still heavy with the smell of wet earth, rotting vegetation, and broken timber. But through the clouds, a pale light began to filter. It was not exactly hope, not yet, but it was a beginning. In time, children would return to school, markets would reopen, fishermen would cast their nets again, and farmers would replant their fields. Roads would be patched, bridges rebuilt, homes reconstructed. And the memory of December 6, 2025, would live on as a warning, as a lesson, and as a testament to the endurance of a people who refused to be defeated by nature's fury. As days stretched into a full week after the disaster, the scale of the destruction became painfully clear. Satellite images revealed vast areas of West Sumatra scarred by landslides, entire hillsides stripped bare, and villages half buried under thick layers of earth. Officials described the event not as a single catastrophe, but as a chain reaction of interconnected failures, hydrological, geological, and infrastructural, triggered by relentless rain but magnified by years of environmental neglect. Every new report seemed heavier than the last, detailing the collapse of irrigation canals, the destruction of farmlands, and the contamination of drinking water sources. Even the proud, serene Lake Maninjau, usually a symbol of calm beauty, now carried a murky brown stain around its edges, filled with sediment washed down from the mountains.